So a cow raised with love until the day that, like this, no pain, no suffering, it's dead, and you eat it. How is that morally incorrect?
Because none of those things constitute love. If you love someone, you wouldn't do any of those things to someone. So it's exploitation, isn't it?
Are animals on the same level as human beings when regard to debating exploitation and love?
Hi Josianne, it's nice to meet you. My name is Ed. Today I'm at UT Austin with a banner that talks about veganism and animal abuse. I don't think we're necessarily going to debate the banner, but more about your feelings around veganism, because you alluded to having some vegan friends.
Yes.
So would you maybe like to tell me a little bit about your experience of veganism and where you're at in that vegan place?
I'm personally not vegan.
Yeah.
The only times that I do commit to veganism is during Lent. Yeah. As an Orthodox Christian, there's 54 days out of the year where I have to be a vegan and maintain that fast. But like I said, I have many friends that are vegan full time. Many wonderful friends like Madhavi. I don't know if she would watch this, but she's a great vegan, and she does stuff like this where she tries to debate with me about being a vegan, and I'm like, I don't want to do it.
No. Well, I think the first thing is maybe this notion of Lent. I'm really interested. Why are you vegan for Lent?
So that's just the Orthodox fast. It's a monastic fast. Yeah. You just eat the most simple foods and maintain the fast for as much as you can. If you can't do it, then you try your best. But
what's the benefit of doing so?
It's to bring you closer to God and to prepare yourself for Easter or Pascha, as it's said in my tradition.
And so if it brings you closer to God, is then an argument that it's something you would be tempted to do kind of 365 days of the year if it's something that has a tangible benefit?
Well, no. That the beauty of Lent is that it is something that only comes once a year. The beauty of Easter is that it comes only once a year. And veganism affords me that way to have a simpler life and to bring myself closer to God, because I am denying myself those things that would bring me more energy or bring me more joy in eating. It's maintaining myself as a monastic for 54 days, if you will. A small, meager meal, I can't do it. Obviously, you can tell people I eat too much, but a small, meager meal in the sense, and you eat it as a vegan because the monastics don't have access to the beauties of other foods.
Oh, I see. So it's almost like you're sacrificing. Mm-hmm. You're doing something to bring personal sacrifice to bring yourself closer to God by eliminating some of the luxuries of life. Is that kind of? I
would agree with that, all but saying the word luxury. Now, I think we can all agree that meat does bring lots of nutrition and has benefits to people, especially people of my particular background. In the Middle East, meat is seen as a luxury, but also as a necessity for cuisines, but also energy for people working in the fields. So, yeah.
Oh. You say a necessity for energy, but I suppose for you and I, right? Less about where is that hiding the animals there. Outside of the context of, say, Syria or the Middle East, mm-hmm. and like kind of now where you are right
mm-hmm.
now, is it a necessity for you now to eat animal products? Do you need it for energy?
Let's see. So I don't need it necessarily, but I do want it for energy.
Sure.
So I do sense when I am vegan, I do sense that drop in energy, that drop in excitement and zeal for life. Whereas eating something as simple as a hamburger could bring my energy back. It could be a way for me to bond with friends. And I know you would propose the alternative. Couldn't you bond with friends over a different meal, or couldn't you sustain yourself on different types of energy? But there's a certain thing that meat affords in my culture, in my background, that I just couldn't get anywhere else.
Sure. And I suppose the question of the Lent side of things is, I think partly there's probably a psychological thing, because you do Lent because it brings this kind of closeness to God, and that closeness to God seems to be somewhat facilitated by the existence of meager meals that make you more tired. It's almost like you connotate the two, whereas of course you don't have to feel that way and be vegan. But in terms of culture, do you think that something is moral simply because it's cultural? And undeniably, the consumption of certain meats, like lamb, for example, is, of course, very cultural when it comes to Syrian culture. But does that in and of itself make it a moral thing to do?
No. Of course, different cultures have different morals, but aside from moral subjectivism, there is no a way for us to say that something is moral just because it is within the culture. I think it's more of, in my culture, religion is strongly tied in as well. And my religion, Christianity, allows us to eat meat because God said that we had dominion over all animals. Yeah. And as such, we are able to partake in these particular food groups as long as we don't eat other things that we're not mandated to eat.
Yeah. Well, you say mandated, and of course the consumption of meat isn't mandated. It is a choice, and whilst God may say it's permissible to eat certain animals, it's not a requirement for you to get to the afterlife or to enjoy the plentiful bounties of Christianity.
That is true, but within as you know, we go vegan for Lent. We have 2 festivals, Meat Fair and Cheese Fair. Cheese Fair is 2 weeks before Lent starts. That's the last day you can eat cheeses and dairies, and it's a festival out of it. Same thing with Meat Fair. Meat Fair is the last day you can eat meat, and we have a festival out of it where we gather and we eat all these meats with one another, and it's not mandated by the church whatsoever. Of course, there are Christians that are vegan. However, nothing in the religion says that we cannot be meat eaters, and I don't understand the argument of you must be a meat eater because it's like the sign says animal abuse or the best alternative. I don't buy into those arguments.
Well, I guess the argument comes down to the fact that it is a want and not a need. It's not a religious need. Your ascendancy into the afterlife isn't predicated on you eating animals. So it's not a religious need. It's also not a personal need because you don't have to do it. So it is a want in both senses of the word. I mean, God gave us free will to do many, many different things. Right. So fundamentally, how we live is based on wants rather than needs, especially when it comes to animals. And so the reason that veganism becomes this conversation is because it's something that we partake in as a choice. And so I guess the question is, well, if we have the choice to not do what we do to animals, then why would we choose to unnecessarily kill them or even just subject them to a life of suffering, as is the case for the vast majority of animals who are farmed, especially in the US?
Right, but wouldn't you agree that there are also other avenues in our lives that do bring suffering and unnecessary suffering? For example, fast fashion brings suffering. There are so many, things that we can do to avoid that suffering. And I understand the argument for veganism in all areas but one. Animals suffer, yes, but I don't understand the comparison to human suffering. Human suffering is, in my mind, has more value, something that I would much rather stop than animal suffering.
It's not an either or. Even if you believe that to be true, we can still seek to reduce both. And the existence of fast fashion doesn't mean that fast fashion is justified, and also doesn't justify animal cruelty. Both things should be reduced or eliminated as far as is possible. So the existence of one bad doesn't justify the existence of another bad.
That is a fair argument. I think I'm just looking at this now, switching my argument to more of a practical approach. Yeah. Should we direct our energies to stopping animal abuse and stopping people from eating meat? If we only have an allocated amount of persuasion, if you will, or debate, if you will, that we can engage in with the general populace, should we engage in veganism and stopping people from eating animals? Or should we instead direct our attentions elsewhere? As we know, the world is full of great suffering, and there are individuals who do not have the opportunities that we do, and we can direct our energies to stopping things like that. So which one would you prefer us to do? Like, direct our energies towards veganism or direct our energies towards the other issues? And of course you can say that we can do both, but
well, you can do both in a way that doesn't even mean splitting your time. Whilst I could make the argument, veganism brings human benefits from an ecological perspective, from personal health perspectives, and even just from the removal of things like slaughterhouse work, which causes severe mental and psychological harm to slaughterhouse workers. Even outside of the human benefits to veganism, when we talk about like allocation of energy, we have to eat. We all do it. We have to go to supermarkets or to restaurants or wherever it is that we get food, or order it from delivery apps. Whatever we do, we have to acquire food. And so being vegan doesn't necessarily mean changing or expending any more energy. It just means in those situations where we have to do something, we just opt to do the plant-based food. So when you go out for a meal, eat a plant-based meal. When you go to the canteen, opt for the plant-based food. When you order, wherever it is, just choose the plant-based food. And then you have all of the same time that you have right now to spend working and expending energy on doing other things for humans. It's just you've also eliminated that animal aspect, which you haven't used any more energy because you have to eat anyway.
So here's a question for you. If you had the power to go into Congress and pass a bill and get it passed and signed into law, of course there's always armed people that don't agree with laws that get signed into, but if there was a reasonable reaction to signing veganism into law, would you do it?
Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. Now, wouldn't that just remove the free will that you advocated for? And there was a part of your argument earlier that veganism is a choice and it's a want to eat meat. So would you still pass that law into existence knowing that it removes that choice that human beings have? So
every law removes choice. Laws against hate crimes remove the choice to do hateful things to others. We have the choice to do anything. We can choose to be as cruel as we want, but that doesn't mean we have the right to be as cruel as we want.
So just circling you back to my question though, for example, where was I going with this? Give me one moment to think.
No worries.
So, okay, the sign over here says that eating animals is animal abuse. You mentioned the word cruel earlier, being cruel to animals, right? So would it reduce the benefits of being a vegan, or reduce the just the I don't know, the benefits of being a vegan by signing it into law and mandating it? Would you rather the individual make the personal choice to go vegan because they have to recognize the goods that they're doing, like you said, helping mental health and all those other things?
Well, I mean, we're talking about a hypothetical here, which can't happen. And so in this hypothetical scenario where I could sign a law which would result in minimal conflict, which would then just bring about the benefits of veganism without the consequences of civil unrest, it seems fairly obvious that I would do that. But ultimately, that's not the situation we're in, which is kind of why I am here having conversations with people, because fundamentally, before anything could happen from a legislative point of view, it requires society to be at the point where it's accepted. So I do believe that, fundamentally we need to change people's minds and help them understand that there is a choice and they should choose to do something else.
So would you agree with the sentence that you want people to want to be vegan rather than you want people to be vegan?
I want people to want to be vegan.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that would go down to a particular understanding of the animals and just eating animals in general, right? Is that the boil down point of your argument?
Well, I think that society doesn't always get better just because laws mandate something. I think society gets better because the society itself begins to understand that there is a different way of living that we should all kind of partake in and would be preferable. So if I have the choice, I want people to understand that there is a harm to what we do to animals, and society as a whole would benefit from that harm no longer occurring, from a moral perspective, an environmental perspective, even a personal health perspective.
Interesting. So do you think that our current society is morally unsound, and by being vegan as a society we would improve in our morality?
Yes, improve. I'm not saying it'd be perfect.
Interesting.
There are other moral issues outside of veganism, but the pursuit of veganism would make society morally better when it comes to our view and treatment of animals.
So when I go to the supermarket and buy a pound of beef, or when I go to P. Terry's and order a hamburger, I'm not making the moral decision, okay, I'm going to buy into the torture of this animal, and I'm going to buy into this continued tradition of eating meat. I don't think any individual thinks that way when they go and eat these things. I think that is why we have the continued consumption of meat. So
it's the disconnection, isn't it?
It is a disconnection, but also, I hate to say this, but how realistic is it for us to turn down something that we enjoy eating and to turn down something that brings no personal harm to myself or to any human being that is within my bubble?
Yeah.
How realistic is that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, hopefully more realistic than maybe you believe, and maybe even I believe on some days. Ultimately, it's not about whether or not it's realistic or unrealistic. It's about whether it's the right thing to do. And I believe that if we can avoid causing unnecessary harm to animals, it's the right thing to do, regardless of whether it's realistic to believe everyone's going to do it.
So why would it be the right thing to do? Why do you think it's the right thing to do?
Because it reduces unnecessary harm and suffering.
Well, aren't we harming and suffering the earth by cutting down trees?
Well, absolutely, we should reduce that as well.
So how realistic is it? If we're reducing eating animals, reducing cutting down trees, how are we as a society going to function when we've already evolved to this point? We've already had the Industrial Revolution. We've had everything to facilitate where we are at this point. How realistic is it for us to go back in time?
Well, it's not about going back in time. It's about moving forward and finding better ways of doing things that are different to how they were in the past. It's not about fundamentally dismantling everything. It's just about making significant changes. And sure, we can go back in time and reforest and create more nature, which would be a good thing. But from an agricultural perspective, I'm thinking we should be progressive, not regressive. And so whether or not it's realistic or not doesn't mean that it's not something we should try to pursue. And everything that's ever changed for the benefit of society at one point seemed unrealistic. Because why it feels unrealistic is because we're challenging a social norm. The social norms should be challenged, and indeed, yeah, like I said, the only reason we are where we are today is because we did things that at a certain point seemed unrealistic.
So what if there were facilities, and I'm sure there are, this is grass-fed beef and certified organic or whatever, where they minimize the suffering of animals? Would that be all right?
You said minimize, and that's the important word. It's not the fullest reduction, though. It still contributes to a system where an animal is being exploited and ultimately killed. And even within those systems, there's, branding, certain mutilations and things like that.
So a cow raised with love until the day that, like this, no pain, no suffering, it's dead, and you eat it. How is that morally incorrect?
Because none of those things constitute love. If you love someone, you wouldn't do any of those things to someone. So it's exploitation, isn't it?
Are animals on the same level as human beings when regard to debating exploitation and love?
No, they don't need to be. You know, with dogs, we love dogs, and we would never do the things that we do to these animals to dogs because apparently we love dogs. And if someone said I'm a dog lover, and then they were mutilating their animals, killing them at a fraction of their lifespan, and subjugating them to a life of exploitation, that wouldn't constitute love.
Right. Well, that's not love either, though. This is just a societal norm of keeping dogs and cats as pets. What if you were in a society where there were no animals kept as pets, but you did still consume meat by killing, the animal? Perfect, no pain, nothing. The cow doesn't know better if I love it or not. My uncles keep cows. Those cows don't know if my uncles love them or not. They're not missing any, days of their lives. They're not entering a depression. How do we measure emotion of animals, and how do you contribute that to your argument?
Well, I don't think we need to measure emotion. As long as we recognize there is emotion, that's all that matters.
Well, so then can we say that the ground cries every time I step foot upon it, or a tree cut down is killing 1,000 animals or spirits within the tree? We can't measure these things. Therefore, how can you add it to your argument and make it, contribute to turning vegan because of harming animals? We can't even measure the harm that we do.
Well, I don't know if I was to harm you, I don't even know if you'd feel that sensation the same as me, because we can't measure how our sensation of harm measures against one another. But I know that you feel something. I know that does contribute to harm. I would infer that you feel much the same way that I do. But there's no reason for me to infer that a cow doesn't feel pain in a similar way to me. They have all the functions that would suggest that they do, and the biological requirements and the evolutionary purpose of feeling pain in the same way that you and I do.
So by that argument then, being vegan is just as cruel as eating meat, because you're doing the same things to trees and same thing to plants
but
that you
aren't
are.
Sentient, are they?
Well, how do we know that cows and other animals are sentient?
Well, at the same time, we don't know certain things. We don't know that we're not living in a simulation. For all I know, none of you are real. But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't treat you with the respect to at least believe that you are. Now, a cow has a heart, a brain, a central nervous system. When something that we think would cause them pain happens, they make noises, they show visual movements, their heart rate increases, their pupils dilate. They show all of the same biological markers that we do to insinuate they do have an experience there.
So just because they have the same biological markers as human beings, and we can measure as humans their reaction to pain, we need to treat animals in one way, but we haven't even began to discover whether or not trees or other plants can feel these things in the same way.
Well, exactly. We don't know, but at the same time, what we do know is that these animals can experience. And if we look at it from a biological perspective, there's an evolutionary purpose for why we feel pain. Humans that are born with I don't know if abnormality is the right word, but born with a difference, which means they don't experience pain, have shorter lifespans because they take more risks, because they don't, care for themselves in the same way, because they're not as fearful of that sensation. So pain serves a very evolutionary purpose, which is the survival of the species. So those things would be intrinsic within other animals who have also endured the same, historical experiences that we have up until, of course, where we are now.
Actually, I like that argument.
Thank you.
But okay, last thing before I have to go. And this is devil's advocate. I'm sorry. I have to make this argument. So what happens if someone just tells you, I just don't care? An animal can have these, react to pain in the same way that a human being can. And I can acknowledge that a cow has a heart and a brain and this nervous system, but I simply do not care. The cow's life doesn't affect my life. Eating this cow and that cow's suffering doesn't affect me. How would you tell or argue to that person?
Well, it's hard to argue against that person because that person is exhibiting, selfish tendencies, aren't they? They're not living in alignment with what we would hope most people live in alignment with. And I guess the argument I would try to make to them is, if you met someone who had the same philosophy as you, and they said, I don't care if you feel pain, I want to do these things to you, I want to harm you, to abuse you, to exploit you, and I just don't care, we would still object to that, because what we're interested in is our individual experience. So
I think the issue here, though, is my example is animals are one layer removed from us. I can understand a human because everyone here looks exactly like me and thinks exactly like me and talks exactly like me, whereas an animal has no ability to express itself or even to begin engaging itself in a circle of human beings.
Well, they can express themselves. It's just that we don't necessarily understand their expressions because we don't speak the same languages. They don't speak the same languages as us. And what about a human who's born with cognitive difficulties, who can't communicate, who doesn't have an experience the same way that we do, that can't partake in the same things that you just said were important?
You must agree that a human being can understand a human being
Sometimes.
much more and much better than a human being can understand any other member of his species by virtue of being of the same species.
But if that human has learning difficulties, which means that they can't understand language, or they don't have the ability to communicate or to be able to participate in society like we can, does that mean that their life is less valuable simply because they don't have the abilities that you and I have?
I didn't say that. For the record, I did not say that.
But it's inferred in the argument.
Oh God, I'm so late. Well, this was fun.
This is all right. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. All right, take care.